Hi guys, welcome to Safe Diving. Now on this channel I go through anything and everything to do with scuba diving, including how-to guides and sort of helpful, useful tips and tricks, whilst talking about my own experience as a professional scuba diver. Now in today's video, this is actually requested by one of my commenters. They asked if I could do a video on scuba diving knots, so I obliged, and this is a video where I'm basically going to be breaking down the basic scuba diving knots that every scuba diver should know. Now the first thing that you need to know whilst dealing with rope in the water is that rope is evil when it is underwater. And I'm not even joking about that. Rope is very, very dangerous when it's underwater because you never know sort of where it is. It's free to move around, it can tangle yourself up, and it can be very, very dangerous. So if you're new to scuba diving and you've never really experienced rope in the water, try and do it in a safe environment so that you can practice these knots in a safe and secure place where you can always reach the surface. And just always take care when dealing with rope in the water. Okay, so let's take a closer look at sort of scuba diving knots. Okay, so one of the very first knots that sort of most people will teach you is the bowline. Bowline is a very practical knot. This is an end knot, so it goes on the very end of a rope, and this basically just creates a loop that you can attach things off onto. Now it's not a sliding knot, so it's not going to get tighter. It just stays its basic size when you set it up. It can take immense strain, but one great thing about the bowline is no matter how tight you sort of pull it, it's very easy to untie afterwards, so it's a very, very practical knot, and you will use this everywhere, not just on the dive site, but I use this all the time at home. So I've got a cleat in front of me, I've of course got my line. You wrap the dynamic ends, the short end of the rope, around your object, whatever you're tying it off onto. On the longer end, you're basically just going to create a loop. And then with this, what you do is you take the dynamic end and then you pass it down through the loop. Make sure that this section is on top. Wrap it around the long side of the long line, and then push it back through the loop so it's going out in the same line as the as when it came in. So it should look something like that. And then that way, when you pull it nice and tight, you see how it tightens on itself. So no matter which two sort of lines are pulling against one another, it's always tightening itself. And that's a really, really strong kind of end knot to create a loop. But if you really, really wrench it as tight as you can, all you have to do is just get this section and then just kind of like thumb that down a little bit. And that just creates a decent amount of slack, so you can untie it really quickly and easily, so you're not attached to that object permanently. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the sheet bend. So the sheet bend is kind of similar to a reef knot, and it's basically a way of attaching two separate ropes together. Yeah, you can use a reef knot, but I tend to prefer the sheet bend. I find it's a lot stronger, and where it particularly excels in sort of two separate sized ropes. So if you've got a big chunky rope and then a skinny rope, and you have to attach the two, then this is quite a sort of quick and easy knot that I use. So the first thing is take your chunky rope and then just basically make a U shape, and then with your skinny rope you're going to go underneath it, up, and then over one side, underneath both of it, and then you're basically just going to loop it underneath itself here. So that way when you pull that tight and pull that really tight, that's going to stay nice and secure. No matter how much you kind of yank it, or even yank it and then release and then yank it, as a lot of boats do with all their kind of movements, that's not coming undone. If you now compare that to a reef knot, which is effectively the same except it goes like that. I think some people call this a square knot. It's very neat, it's very sort of natural, but as you can see, as you kind of pull, and then eventually it undoes. So I prefer a sheet bend. I just find it's much more reliable, and yeah, it's really quick and easy. And yeah, that's how to attach two separate rope ends together. This is particularly useful for sort of all sorts of things. I use this all the time when I've got sort of two separate bits of rope on sort of lift bags, for example. If you're attaching something, you've got one line and that's sort of wrapped around ghost gear or whatever you got, and then you have to attach that to another line and clip it off onto whatever you need to use a piece of rope. Then the sheet bend is definitely the way to go. Now this is another very useful end knot, sort of creating a loop. This is called a double figure of 8. The regular figure of 8 is a useful knot in itself, and I'll show you that now because that's basically how I start it. So take the dynamic end, the short end of your rope, and you basically pass it over the long line, the static end, around, and then sort of back up and over and through this loop, and you see how that creates kind of a figure of 8. So that's nice. So that basically creates a stopper. So if you've got something, another line like a 2 half hitch or something, it won't go past that. So that's useful not in itself, but it's also very useful for creating a loop. If you're attaching this onto something and you need you've got a very, very heavy load, you want a really secure line, then you loop it around, and then all you basically do is follow this line back through itself. So I'm going to pass it up through there, pull it taut, and then around, and then back through there, and at all points you're basically just following yourself sort of back sort of through and then up, and then that is a double figure of 8. So that's a very, very strong end knot. Sort of mountain climbers use this when they attach onto their harness. Very, very strong. It can take very strong loads, and that knot isn't going anywhere. So if you need to attach onto something really strong and secure, you can do that. If you don't have to loop around it, you can sort of save yourself a bit of time, and yeah, just tie a figure of 8 like I did at the beginning, but with sort of 2 lines of rope. So with that, you loop it over itself, under itself, and then back up through that knot, and then pull it nice and taut. You can tidy it up and sort of sort these lines out, but that's your basic double figure of 8, and that's a really quick and easy sort of end knot to create a loop. Now another useful end knot for creating a loop is the 2 half hitch. Now this is a sliding sort of knot, so it's a matter of, if you don't want a static size loop on the end of your line, you actually want it to tighten up, or if you want to kind of loosen it off to create more sort of tension on the line, then you can use 2 half hitch. There is an alternative which I'll show you next. So 2 half hitch, very quick and easy. Sort of loop it over the static side, the long side, go under but sort of inside of this loop, over itself, over the long line, and then back up through that little loop, and that creates a 2 half hitch. So each of these really simple layovers is called a hitch. So 2 of them, oh sorry, a half hitch, 2 of them together is a 2 half hitch. Just tighten that off, and then this is a sliding knot. So that can be nice and taut, and you can see how it's not really going anywhere, but if you want this line to be a bit longer, you can slide it down and and there you go. So this is good if you've got sort of bunches of things. I use this in the garden all the time with sort of bunches of sort of sticks and whatnot. Yeah, you can really sort of bunch that up and make that nice and tight. Or if you need to, you can loosen that off and basically get the correct length of that line as you need it to be. So yeah, 2 half hitches, very useful, and yeah, it kind of sticks where it is, but you can slide it, so it's a very practical knot, but not quite as strong as the bowline. If you really do sort of work at it, it tightens itself. So it has its uses, just be aware that it's a sliding knot, but yeah, very, very practical. And of course, because we're scuba divers, we're often dealing with boats, which means we're often dealing with cleats. So this is a cleat, if you didn't know what it was called. This is a very cheap and basic one that I've just attached to a piece of wood so I can demonstrate to you guys. But cleats are very, very useful for sort of quickly attaching things, and this is how you're basically going to do a cleat hitch. Yeah, it's very simple. When you're sort of mooring up your boat, you want to attach it onto something, and basically how you do it is you loop it around both of them, and then you're going to go up and over, and then create kind of an X shape. And then this bit is where I always used to kind of mess up, and what you basically do is you twist it over itself, and then over itself again, and then loop that end over this end of the cleat, and then pull that nice and tight. And you see how these two sort of lines, they're parallel to one another. Just sort of pull that nice and tight, and that's how you want your cleat to look, so that when this line is kind of pulled, that's not going anywhere. Very, very quick and easy to do. The way I used to mess up is I'll basically just loop it over. I can't even remember how I used to mess it up, but maybe I did it that way round. But basically that just creates I can't remember how I used to screw up, but basically, yeah, you want them to sort of create those parallel lines, and then this line, as that kind of pulls tight, it actually pulls itself tight, so it's a sort of self-tightening knot. Very, very strong, very secure, and yeah, very quick to undo, because you can just undo that and bing bang bosh, you're away. I have seen some people call the OXO knot, which I'm not too savvy on, but I imagine it makes an O shape, you make an X shape, and then you make another O. That could be wrong, but yeah, I just prefer the regular cleats. Sort of very strong, very quick, and very easy to do. And again, I use something very similar all the time when I'm tying off sort of lines in the garden or whatnot. Just that basic twist sort of makes that sort of locking mechanism where it kind of locks off onto itself. Is very, very quick and easy just to do a quick twist, and that tightens itself. So that's very, very useful. But yeah, the cleat hitch, very essential, especially if you're dealing with boats. Okay, and as a final bonus knot, this is another very basic knot that I use all the time. I use this on all of my accessories, like my torches and my dive knives, as well as sort of octos and my SPG. This is called a bolt snap knot, and this is basically how to attach a bolt snap onto the hose or onto the knife or whatever it is, so that you have a small attachment point that isn't quite fixed. So if it ever gets snagged on anything, you can literally cut it free, and you're not going to damage it, and this one lasts a long, long time. A lot of people say, I'll just use a cable tie just to attach it on. Cable ties, they go brittle, they can damage things, and yeah, they just don't last as long. They're not quite as flexible as well. I've seen other people say if you use a cable tie and an O-ring kind of bent over, then you can do that, and that way it's kind of breakaway, which, yeah, sure, but also that O-ring is just going to degrade over time, and yeah, that thing that you think is actually attached onto yourself is actually gone. And yeah, if you get it snagged on something, it's just going to rip it off, and that's gone wherever it is. Whereas with this, the line itself, this is just basic line. I got this off of sort of one of my spools. If you check out this video here where I talk about how to sort of upgrade your spool, one of the first things that I do with a basic spool is just take off a whole bunch of that excess line, and then use this. I actually have it here. There's a whole bunch of line, and this is really, really useful stuff because it's marine grade, obviously. It's very strong, it's a little bit flexible, but you can cut through it really, really quickly if you need to. So yeah, so a bolt snap knot, very useful. I'm just going to put it here on this second stage hose, and I like to get it about a fist's width away, so it's going to be about between the M and the H of that. But yeah, all you do is you get a little bolt snap. I've got about, I think I measured this about 19, maybe 20 inches of line. And all you're going to do is you're going to lope it sort of through the eye of the bolt snap 3 times around the hose. I'm going to try and make this as easy for you guys to see, but lots of little things are tricky to grab hold of. So it's gone through once, it's gone through twice, try and keep it neat, and then it's gone through 3 times. Okay, now you want to position it, so I kind of want it about there, which is perfect. And then loop that end back to the beginning, as it were, and pull it nice and tight. And then we're going to tie half of a reef knot or a square knot, depending on what you want to call it. That's just over under, nothing fancy, just that. Pull that nice and tight, and then flip it over to the other side and do another half of a reef knot. That's sort of over under. I think some people call it half of a square knot. And then you want to do, you basically want to finish that square knot. So tie it sort of backwards. That's the wrong way, sorry. So that it does create a, oh no, I was right the first time. So that does create a square knot. Now pull it nice and tight, both ends, because you don't want this moving around too much. And that's basically it. Just double check that it's in the right position, because now we're going to make it a bit more permanent. Because what we're going to do is we're going to cut the ends off, but leave about, I don't know, 4 mil on each end, because then we're going to sort of melt it down with a lighter. Just melt it down. Obviously be very careful of your hoses, don't sort of let that heat get too close. And then when it gets to within a millimeter or something, just press it down with the edge of the metal of your lighter. And you see how that melts that down kind of almost into the knot. So it makes it very, very strong and secure. On the other side, be very, very careful of that hose again. Melt it down. Probably should cut that a little bit shorter. But as it melts down, just push it and melt it down into itself. So that really seals itself, so that knot isn't going to undo accidentally. But you can clip that off onto a D-ring, you can clip it off wherever you want. You've got a bit of flexibility in that, so it's not too rigid. It's not going to put too much pressure on that hose and damage it. But also if you need to, you can get a dive knife through that and sort of cut those through without damaging the hose. So yeah, if you do get snagged, it's not the end of the world. So I put pretty much everything on this. I've got a dive knife here that has that kind of bolt snap knot on it. Very, very useful, quick and easy. And yeah, most of my sort of essentials that don't have a big sort of bulky sort of clip or whatever that you have to attach onto things. If you just need something sort of small and neat and tidy, then yeah, your bolt snap knot is the way to go. Okay, so there were just a few basic scuba diving knots. Very easy, and it's always worth practicing with gloved hands as well. If you're diving in colder waters, then there's no point in practicing those knots with your bare hands. You might as well do it with the gloves that you're going to be wearing, just so that you can really experience what it's going to be like tying those knots, and just practice them again and again and again, just like the bowline. The bowline took me quite a while to actually get used to it, because I kept telling myself to do it the wrong way around, and if you do it the wrong way around, it just doesn't work at all. So yeah, just practice those knots in the kind of environment that you are going to be practicing them. Now obviously if you're trying to do that in the water, make sure that you're doing it safely. Again, rope is very, very dangerous in the water, especially if there's lots of slack, lots of loose rope kind of floating around, so just be very, very careful. But yeah, if you want me to do some more advanced knots to do with more sort of cave exploration or whatever, then let me know down in the comments below. And if you want me to do a video on anything else, let me know it down in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe this video, because that's going to help my channel grow. Thank you for watching. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your family during this coronavirus crisis. Thank you for watching, and of course, safe diving. Someone reverses up my street.